Hello everyone, welcome back to the Crash MotoGP Podcast. And after 1,043 days, Marc Marquez is a Grand Prix winner again in MotoGP. A complete domination of the weekend in Aragon. But we also have stuff that went on with Marc's brother Alex, as him and Pecco Bagnaia were embroiled in a incident in yesterday's Grand Prix, which has very much split the fan bases of MotoGP. But ultimately, it was a racing incident. We'll get onto that as well. Jorge Martin leading the World Championship by 23 points after another solid and consistent weekend. Joining me as ever is Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan. And Lewis, I want to start with you. You know, Marc Marquez, a race winner again in MotoGP, but it was almost like a throwback to 2019, how dominant it was. It was pretty special, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really winding back the clock stuff. It was, and it wasn't even like, you know, it wasn't just like domination in the race. It was all weekend from FP1 straight away. And, you know, we spoke about this on the podcast last week. We saw Aragon as a big chance for Marquez. Left-handed circuit, it's always been a good track for him. Obviously the new track surface kind of played a part in that as well, with it being quite low grip and the grip changing from day to day. But yeah, I think you can take those special kind of conditions aside and still appreciate that this was, you know, a special ride. This was a special weekend from a special rider. This was something we all, I think all of us knew you could still do it. But obviously it's been such a long time since 2021, you know, that Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. And even then, you know, we think back to that Grand Prix. He wasn't on course to win that. That was Pecco Bagnaia's race before he crashed out. So that, you know, this is kind of, you know, different still. You know, that these two things aren't really equatable, because this was Marquez at his best.
It really was, and Pete, it was just like Lewis said. It was straight away on the Friday. He just went out and he looked comfortable, and then he kind of plays it down, saying it was only Friday, and then we get to Saturday, and then the Saturday morning he puts it on pole by attempts from the next person, which I think was the point where I went, this is on this weekend for Marquez, really.
Yeah, that's right. There was that overnight rain, wasn't there? And I think that probably altered the course of the weekend. And then again on Saturday, of course, just to double down on it. But yeah, I think that was the crucial moment, wasn't it? Everyone was thinking, or at least Marc was saying publicly, that, you know, these other guys, they'll catch up to me. They'll get closer as the track improves and the grip improves. Instead, the track goes in the opposite direction, doesn't it? It was almost like all of the misfortune he's had this year, you know, crashing at Kota, damp patch at Jerez, the injury at Saxering down the grid, the ride height device, all of that got reversed, didn't it? And it just all went his way, and he and the Gresini team just made the most of it, played it perfectly. You know, the changing track conditions, really slow race, 12 seconds slower than Bastianini 2 years ago. But that's how tricky the conditions were, and it was, as Lewis said, just perfect for Marc, you know, to show what he could do as a rider, and he still got it. So yeah, fantastic for him. And on the other side, yeah, everything went wrong for Pecco, didn't it? I mean, you know, his worst weekend, really, isn't it? That since the start of the sprint era, I think 1 point. So, you know, it just shows how much things can change instantly. But yeah, I think certainly, as you say, that pole position on the Saturday, that was the moment where, you know, they were either going to catch him and get on terms with him, maybe. Instead, it went the other way, and it just continued, didn't it? Then right up until Sunday and the checkered flag. So I thought he'd be a little bit more sort of emotional, I have to say, after those wins, that big long break, but. You know, I think it just showed that he knows he can do it, doesn't it, as well? That's the other side of it. As soon as he took the flag in the sprint, it was already talking about Sunday, wasn't it? And finishing the job and everything else. And I think that, for me, that just underlined anyway that, you know, he kind of expected it was going to happen. And but now it has. So let's see. He's a confidence guy, isn't he? You know, Marc's always been someone who believes in himself, and this is going to be a big boost for him.
Yeah, and that's one thing I noticed as well, Lewis. He kind of played it down after the sprint straight away. He was like, it's just a sprint win. And I'm like, you could see the focus that he was just trying to emphasize on his race pace. And there was a good clip of him, Jorge Martin, and Pedro Acosta in the back of a car getting taken from the podium. And he was still even saying to Jorge Martin, oh, you should have been closer to me in qualifying. But Martin was saying, no. He was still not kind of believing what he was doing, which for Marc Marquez, I'm like, well, maybe he didn't quite believe how good that the weekend was. Yes, the track surface played into his hands, but what he done on Sunday was just, you know, Martin couldn't answer anything to him.
No, and I think it kind of goes back to this old thing that we've heard time and time again about Marquez from riders who've been within the Honda stable. They've looked at his data and they've gone, you look at what he's doing here and it's so weird. We can't do this. And Mark's Aragon win kind of reminds me a little bit of Valentino Rossi's Donington win. Was it 2005 when it was absolutely atrocious conditions? I sort of remember in the back of my mind people like Colin Edwards saying, Rossi was locking the front tire every corner, but still he was holding on to it. And it's, that's the kind of, it's races like this where you get a kind of a measure of the really special guys, because I think people think you kind of have funny conditions, it kind of closes things up. It's not really the case with MotoGP. It only seems to feed into Marquez's strengths. And we've seen it time and time again with flag to flag races and wet races. Marc is just so good at that feeling of being able to feel the grip, feel where it is. Jorge Martin, I think it was, said at the weekend, through turns 9 and 10, Marc had 4 or 5 degrees more lead angle than anyone else. And and you contrast that with like some of the Aprilia riders. They were saying that they couldn't even get their knee down. It was, they were struggling that much with the grip. Marc's just so intuitive with how he feels the bike and how he feels the grip. And it's a natural talent thing that nobody else in that grid possesses. And that's not a slight in any way to any of those riders. We know there are a lot of great riders there, but there's just, it was this weekend when we saw why, when the conditions are right, when Marc has the bike under him to be competitive, that there is nobody better than him in MotoGP right now. And, going forward into next year when he's going to have a factory bike, I very much expect that to continue.
Yeah, no, I think so as well. And I really like the point, I think Matt Oxley tweeted it was about the 2019 qualifying from Bruno, where Petrucci, I think, said it was raining for everyone else, but it didn't seem to be raining for Marquez, and he put it on pole by like 2.5 seconds on dries. Pete, when he's in that, he didn't look like he was even pushing that much, and it's so strange to explain. When he looks really fast, he looks so smooth, and he's just hitting every apex, and it's like people talk about the alien status, but when you see him in that mold and he's able to just do what he done at the weekend, in an era of MotoGP where it's so close. It was like a throwback to 2019, honestly. I just couldn't believe it for what I've seen over the whole weekend from him.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. We're so used to races qualifying being decided by split seconds, aren't we? And everything being so close. So when as Lewis said, you get these tricky conditions, it almost seems to separate people, isn't it? You see who can stand out more, because the rider, we've talked about it a lot, haven't we? The bikes with a lot of technology and things like that, sometimes the rider influence is reduced, isn't it? And then you get these sort of things that sort of throw all the data out the window, the conditions that you're not expecting, the tires aren't working as you think they will, and all this, and then it's more in the hands of the riders, isn't it? And you see people make the difference, and yeah, Marc definitely made the difference this weekend. There's no question about that. And it just already I think it makes you think about what is he going to do next year on the factory bike.
Yeah, it does. And Lewis, what do you think he can do now for the rest of the season? Do you think, as you know, confidence breeds into him when he knows he's got the win now and he knows he can do it? The other riders, it will level up as he gets to Misano this weekend, but they have to be thinking that when he's in this form and he's in that mindset that he knows this is what I can do now, it'll be very interesting to see how he can not influence a title race, but kind of get amongst the others in there, wouldn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he kind of played down Aragon a little bit on Sunday, saying like, the track conditions were special. If we take my feeling from Austria, that's more representative, that kind of thing. So Marc's very much taking it step by step, but I think there must be a worry now from his rivals that he's got that duck off the back. The chains are off now. And like you say, Marquez is such a confidence rider that he will probably take that on. And Misano has generally been quite a good circuit for him as well over the years. We've got 2 races at Misano, so in theory, when you get to that Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, the gap between the GP23s and the GP24 shouldn't be as big, because tracks rubbered in, so much data, all the rest of it. And then there are races at the end of this year, as we've spoken about. Thailand's always been good for Marc. Phillip Island, another left-handed circuit. Valencia, another left-handed circuit. There are a lot of opportunities there for Marc to make the difference. And Phillip Island, I think, is a good one, because we always talk about that as being a real rider's circuit. The rider outperforms the bike generally, and you have to think that Marc will definitely have a strong chance there. So I think they will start to worry that he can be I think they have been worried a little bit about it, but because he hasn't shown it yet, there's always been that sort of comfort level. I think now that will go. And now that we're getting into this crunch point in the championship, he's only 70 points back, which is a lot, but there's 296 left up for grabs. That's, as we saw with Pecco this weekend, it can swing quite big. And if Marc gets on a run and starts taking points away, if Martin has a few bad rounds, Pecco has a few bad rounds, the picture does change quite quickly. So, yeah, I think we are going to start where we're entering a new phase of this season with Marc now.
Yeah, I think so as well. And just to remind the listeners, it is 70 points that he's behind Jorge Martin. So, it's near 3 race wins at Grand Prix. But, things have happened in MotoGP and who knows. But I want to touch on the others later on the podium. We'll come on to that. We'll park this. I want to get to the incident yesterday because, yeah, it was the big talking point of the race. And Pecco Bagnaia, Alex Marquez battling for the podium, Pete. And it was just... It looked like Bagnaia had the position done. It looked like he was going to catch and get through on Alex. It was just a matter of time, and then the incident happened. What was your take on it? I think it was a racing incident, and obviously each rider is blaming each other, and that you're always going to get that. But it was a bad weekend for Bagnaia, really, to be caught up in something like that too, wasn't it?
Yeah, nightmare weekend for him, wasn't it? Just everything going wrong. The 2 tyre issues, shall we say, qualifying on the dirty side of the track, and then just to finish it all off, this collision when, as you say, it looked like it was just a matter of time and he would get the 3rd place from Alex Marquez. But obviously, Alex racing in front of his home fans there, isn't he? And potentially joining Marc on the podium for this sort of historic comeback, if you like, by his brothers. So you can imagine, he wasn't keen to give it up, and it basically came down to just not enough room, didn't it? The question then becomes who saw who, or should they have given more room? As you say, the steward said no further action. The interesting thing was that we got a bit of an explanation from them, which was good, and they spoke about looking at the images. They obviously spoke to both riders, and they said they looked at some machine data, and exactly what they looked at we don't know, but interesting because of course when Pecco then came out and he spoke after the decision, he speaks about the data showing that Alex maybe didn't back off as much as you would expect of a rider in a collision. That's the interesting thing when you've got riders on the same bike, isn't it? You've got 2 sets of data that you can look at, and Gigi at the top of the tree, he's an engineer. Whatever the riders are saying, he'll go straight to the engineer. We know it happened. The data, sorry, we know that happened at Portimao, didn't it? When Marc Marquez and Bagnaia collided, and Marc sort of put in that sort of almost a throwaway line that sort of settled the argument of, well, look, Ducati can see the data, and I know what I did, and everything else, and sort of left it there. Now we had Pecco saying the data shows that basically he wasn't to blame. So did the stewards get to see that? I don't know. I mean, they'd need someone in there to also analyse the data and everything else. But interesting that comes out after the decision. Would that have changed things if they had have seen what Pecco says was visible on the data? Who knows? But yeah, certainly. Well, the other thing that would have been good, I suppose, for us lot watching on the cameras, they needed like Rins had the sunglasses, didn't they, with the camera at the Misano test. That's what we needed, because of course you can see the bike and which way it's pointing with the onboard, but the clip for the private test with Rins behind the visor, you can actually see where the helmet's looking, and that would have made the difference. But yeah, impossible to say if you're not on the bike and you're not an ex-rider, I think. But yeah, racing incident, but big implications really. And just lucky, I suppose, for Pecco that Marc was there to take what would have been 8 points more that Jorge Martin would have won, wouldn't it? If Marc hadn't have beaten him in both races. So in that sense, it could have been even worse, quite a lot worse. So, but as it is, that's quite a big lead, isn't it? What is it? 23 points. 23. Jorge Martin. So yeah, we've seen them almost stuck together. Neither of them could break away for quite a few rounds, and now suddenly, this incident just changes things. So the good news, I mean, just to finish this from my side, is that they're not injured, neither of them, because that was a big one, wasn't it? And with Misano coming up this weekend, Pecco's going to be sore, but I think he'll be in better shape than he was last year, Misano at least, and we saw he was competitive then. So
yeah, and I just want to add, it's obviously on social media you get the split opinion of who was right, who was wrong, and then when the riders come out and say what they've said, from my side, I agree with what you've said, Pete. I think it was a racing incident. I think both of them are at fault for it, and the whole he didn't see me, he should have seen me, it's just, well, Alex Marquez didn't run off track. it just cut it back, and Bagnaia tried to go around the outside. Two comes into one, and I think the best thing out of all this, they're not seriously hurt, because when you watch back the way Bagnaia gets caught underneath Alex Marquez's bike, it is terrifying. It's so close to hitting the rear wheel, is so close to hitting him in the head, and I'm just glad that they're both okay. But yeah, Lewis, what's your take on it? It was just, yeah, take it away, mate.
I'm going to play a bit devil's advocate with the data thing, because whenever anyone brings up, the data shows this, I instantly think of Honda in 2015, where they were adamant that they had data that Valentino had kicked Marc, and they were going to show it to the world, and then they were talked down from it, and it's like, it's just almost like one of those things, the data said this, was like, well, we can't say the data, so you can say whatever, but I think. I think Pecco's if I was going to apportion blame, I would give Pecco a little bit more of it, because we've seen this before. We saw it in Portugal. We saw it, kind of a little bit as well at Jerez in the sprint race. Pecco doesn't really seem to know when to pick his fights. We saw in Portugal with Marc, there was. You could, whether or not you could see him on the outside, he was going to come back in. So why are you putting your bike there? That's going to end in contact. Play the corner better. Jerez, when he got kind of sandwiched between Bez and Rip Binder as well, you're quicker than the two of them. Back out of it. Don't fight it. And it was the same with this one, as that Alex, you've seen that Alex hasn't looked around. He was behind him when Alex ran wide into turn 12. You've seen that he doesn't know that you're there. That's a pinch point at turn 12 when turn 13 when you flick right, and Alex is more than likely going to be there.
Yeah,
I think you have to play the game a bit better, especially when you're a championship challenger. Now you can argue, and I would argue that Alex should have looked behind, and he could have been like, well, this is going to be tight. I'll back out if I've got a chance. If I'll fight it again, and Pecco should have done the same thing. Was like, well, there's still time here. I can get it done, and. On all of those occasions that I've mentioned, Pecco's come off the worst, and he's lost points from it. And I think that's something that Ducati needs to sit down with Pecco a little bit, and when it comes to engagement with other riders, is pick your battles. If we finish fourth today, that's better than finishing with no points. That's, and I think Pecco sometimes maybe struggles a little bit with that kind of, settling for what is on offer. When you look at Martin, for example, these past few weeks, second has been what's there for him, and he's taken it, and now he's 23 points in the lead of the championship. I think Pecco needs to just start playing that game a bit more. I think he needs to stop trying to sort of kind of use his stature as a factory rider, as a world champion, to kind of almost bully riders when he's in that position, because they're not going to, they're all, riders are as bad as each other, unless race direction has a button they can press to stop the rider on the inside, to slow them down a little bit, so there isn't an incident. They're gonna fight for positions. That's what they do. You both have to kind of be a bit more intelligent in that situation to avoid a contact, because it was an unnecessary one, and it could have ended really, really badly for Pecco. His season could have ended there and then. Had the crash been, it's when you're talking about an incident like that, it's millimeters in terms of where the bike was, how the bike goes. He could have got his hand stuck in the wheels. All manner of thing could have happened, and he was lucky. I think he now needs to just start picking his battles a bit better, and start reading those races a bit better. Alex Marquez was slower than him. You're going to get him at some point. You didn't need to do it right there and then.
Yeah, it was. That's what I kind of took from it. He had the pace to get past him, and if he had waited 2-3 corners, I know just the nature of how it's happened. But he was going to get third, and I thought that would be a really good ride from Bagnaia to salvage, because the start he had was pretty much identical to Saturday's start, where the rear spun up, and I was like, is the tyre being cooked, essentially, and has he lost that grip? But he really did put a good performance together, Pete. But the incident reminds me of last season with the one he had with Vinales at, was it Le Mans, where they kind of just met in the middle, and they had that sort of incident. It's like, well, it could have been avoided, but it came at the worst possible time, because we're getting into that phase of the championship now where Martin isn't making mistakes, and he's taking the points he can get, and Bagnaia just seemed a little bit off this weekend. I don't know if it was the grip or if it was just the starting position. He just didn't seem to be in control of what he usually is. Like, you're trying to get what I'm saying. It was just tough for Bagnaia, wasn't it?
It was, and I think it brings up this terrible question that we hate, but the team orders thing, doesn't it? Because you automatically, when you see that battle, you think back to the Bastianini-Bagnaia battle of 2 years ago, where there was all that, you give each other room, or you give the title contenders a bit more room than you do the others. Now, is there a bit of sort of ambiguity there where they're not in that situation? We're not far enough into the season where people can say, look, you're mathematically out of it, so just step back in that situation. But are the guys like Bagnaia, Martin, all thinking or expecting that Ducati riders that are not in the title chase will give them a bit more room? And they're thinking, well, hang on a minute, we're still racing for every position. We haven't been told everything. That's the other side of having those kind of team orders, is you get this confusion, don't you? Where people think, well, hang on, I thought there was going to be a bit more room, or I thought I was just racing for myself. And so it's a difficult one to keep control of in those situations, isn't it?
And to add to that as well, I think Ducati does kind of, for its own sake, really does need to sort of have a look at that, because what you don't want is for Alex Marquez to have another incident with Pecco Bagnaia, and then all of a sudden Martin gets more points while Marquez is marked up the front. We've seen how kind of quite poisonous the fan base can be in those situations when they think, oh, well, this is happening, there's sabotage, blah, blah, blah. And it would be easy for people to go, oh, well, Mark's now winning, he's going to be Pecco's teammate next year. Oh, if Pecco has takes a couple of mental blows, is this, a Ducati engineer in a situation? They need to, for their own good, to stop that, is to step in front of it and go, okay, here's your title challengers, here's the guys that can win the championship. If you're not one of them, do not race them hard. In fact, just move out the way. We don't want to see it, but for their own good, because now they're in this situation, which it's the nightmare situation with Martin leading the championship. We talk about this a lot of, they can't really let Martin go to Aprilia with the number one plate. And I thought it was interesting. We saw Gigi Dall'Igna after Mark crossed the line, and he looked very troubled. He looked weighed down by something. That was not a happy man. And it was almost as if he's looked at that and gone, right, okay, Pecco's in the gravel, Mark's winning races, which, they were kind of worried about before they allowed him to come to Gresini in the first place. They didn't really want that equilibrium kind of messed up. Obviously, the Martin's really consistent, is now leading the championship, and they have to look at that and go, that could have been us next year. We could have had those two guys in our stable. Had the situation been managed differently, had Mark been up. Had Mark been up for going to Pramac. I'm not saying that Ducati should have pinned Bagnaia, but I think Ducati, there's a lot that Ducati needs to reckon with for the next few weeks, and certainly one of them is they do need to manage this situation a lot better, or else they are going to end the season with egg on their face.
Yeah, it's kind of, last year was a warning, wasn't it, Pete? It was like, well, Martin got so close, and they're like, well, we just about missed it with Pecco taking the championship, but this time round, they just can't expect it to be the same again, because you've got, like Lewis said, the added factors of Marquez being in there. Martin looks stronger than last year. He's playing the game more. He's, like we've said it, I think it was 2 podcasts ago, he's getting the points and he's waiting for his chances. And this is the point I want to make. Martin leading by 23 points. I was so impressed by him this weekend, because he knew that, he made a mistake in qualifying, he crashed, but then he was able to salvage a second row. And he looks just comfortable in the sprint in the Grand Prix. He did try a little bit at the start with Marquez. You could see him pushing and trying to maybe get closer, but he knew then, he was like, well, I can't get close. I'm going to settle. And that's the best thing for a championship, isn't it? To be consistent. And like I say, he's had 2 second places now for 3 rounds in a row. And it's like, well, that's how you win championships, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. He's doing exactly what he needs to do, and it's just piling the pressure on Pecco and the factory guys. And coming back to the team orders thing, the really tricky bit is, what do you do about guys like Marc and Bastianini, who are kind of, you can obviously say that Bagnaia and Martin are in the title fight. That's clear for everyone. Yep. It's those guys. What do you do about them? You've got other guys, the guy like Alex Marquez, Bears, those guys, they're clearly not in the title fight. Okay, but mathematically they still are, they would argue. But you know what I mean? It's those guys like Marc and Bastianini that do still have a chance if they did go on a big winning streak. It's whether, asking those guys to give a bit more room. It's a bit too early for that. But as we've seen, and as Lewis has said, maybe it's time to take decisions, because incidents are happening. So you don't want that happening again, and because it's a big swing in the points. And and from Martin's side, I'm sure he's when he saw the race results and where's Pecco, wouldn't have believed his luck almost. But he's had bad luck earlier in the year. He's made mistakes. He's had all that pressure of you're throwing points away. He's come back from that. He's held firm, and I think these next few rounds are going to be big. I mean, also for Marc, we've seen. Let's face it, we had Maverick earlier in the year. Great Portimao, great Cota. We were all saying he's in the title fight. Aprilia had been quick in Qatar as well, weren't we? Acosta, great start to the year. If he continues this upward rise, he's in the title fight. Bastianini does Silverstone double. He's in the and they've all sort of dropped away. We've got to see if Marc can hang in there now, haven't we? I think no question, he's going to win more races and certainly fight for them. Is he going to put together a run that will get him in that title contention? That's the bit I think we need to wait and see, because we've kind of been fooled a bit before by other guys earlier in the year, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. And this is the question for you. If you're Jorge Martin, you see Marc Marquez winning and you're in second, is that okay, or is it just focus on Bagnaia? And Bagnaia then has to hope that Marquez almost takes points off Martin that way, doesn't he? If this is going to be a trend that we're going to see for next few rounds, maybe?
Yeah, I think so, because I think that the thing that Martin has on his side in this situation is that the more that Marc beats Pecco, the more kind of psychologically that will play on Pecco's mind going into next year. We know that Ducati with their decision to go back on promoting Martin and give the factory place to Marc next year already kind of showed that Pecco doesn't have that much power as a double world champion within that stable. And the more that Marc beats Pecco, well, Pecco struggles and Martin beats him, the more that's going to play in his mind looking to next year. And so from Martin's perspective, that's probably good, because then it's going to, in theory, force Pecco to ride a bit harder. And we've seen that Pecco is mistake prone, maybe more so than Martin is. We've seen a couple of kind of critical errors there from Martin this year, but Pecco is the one that makes more mistakes generally. And so I think Martin's situation is if Marc went and won all the rest of the races and he was second, that's absolutely fine for Martin. He'll be more than happy to win a championship that way. It would just, it will arguably make his life easier than if Pecco than having a straight fight with Pecco. Yeah,
it does, and coincidentally, it just happens to be Ducati's home race at Misano coming up here. So this is all came in very nicely for them to manage, and who knows what's going to happen this weekend. We'll touch on that at the end briefly, but I want to give a shout out to Pedro Acosta, Pete. Two third places over the weekend, and he looked pretty good, I would say. It's like he was almost saying that he was kind of waiting for this round to come, and he's like, they just kind of felt how they kind of felt earlier on in the season. Yeah, track conditions helped him, but he was very solid for KTM, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was back looking like the Pedro at the start of the year, wasn't he? I think they did go towards his settings from the start of the year. I think he wanted to sort of regain that feeling he had with the bike. The low grip track, he's a bit of a Marquez, isn't he? The low grip track. We also saw the other KTMs, didn't we, up there? I think it was Alasia when the Aprilia guy said it's almost kryptonite. The KTM and the Aprilia, it's like one does well or the other one does well, but they don't both do well. And it was a bit like that this weekend, wasn't it? Where it did go back to KTM's side. Okay, obviously Pecco's accident with and Alex, those two going out, pushed Acosta onto the podium. But still, a great ride for him to get. Because he's almost seen, he's been sort of openly asking questions, isn't he? Why aren't we where we were at the start of the year? And then, because there hasn't been that normal progression of a rookie where they sort of get stronger as the year goes on. He started off with such a bang, didn't he? And then sort of dropped away like all the KTMs did. So, he'll certainly be hoping that this is, going to put him back on track. But as I say, it's a bit like talking about Marc in a title fight. We've got to wait and see now what happens at Misano and the next races after that.
Yeah, Lewis, Acosta said on Saturday that it was his first real sprint podium because he felt that the other ones were kind of gifted to him, and I was really impressed. Even with his qualifying, he did look more of the old Acosta from the first part of the season, didn't he?
Yeah, it's an interesting one to read because, it's funny conditions, so it's really hard to tell how genuine this sort of step forward is that KTM has made since Austria. I think from a point of view of kind of just confidence, it was good for Acosta. We know he left Austria really, really beaten down by that. He was really, really, really miserable and disappointed. So I think just having that back will be good for him. And, the Misano test coming up, I think will be quite helpful for KTM as well, especially Acosta. and having back-to-back races there will be good for him in terms of he can put a lot of what he's learned into action, and I think there's, and certainly in the short term there'll be a few more performances like this for Pedro. But yeah, it was very good, and to kind of keep Brad at bay in the Grand Prix as well was a very, very solid result. I think, I think it's, is this kind of a Costa back to where he was at the start of the season? I don't think so, because obviously we didn't see anything from the Aprilias when we thought we would, and it all together it was a very, very odd weekend. But yeah, at the very least, Acosta's got a bit of confidence back from that, and as a rookie, that's so important.
Yeah, it is. And just to touch on the rest of the KTMs, Brad Binder fourth. Jack Miller would have been inside the top 10, but then got, due to tire pressure penalty, dropped him down to 15th, got 1 point. Augusto Fernandez was in 12th. So, it was a better weekend, but like I say, track conditions played into it. But, a solid weekend for KTM, I would say, but paid a weekend to forgive for Aprilia. I think it's probably the worst weekend they've had all season. I mean, especially for the factory boys, Elisa Spargaro having the incident at the turn 1 in the sprint, and then Maverick Vinales. I mean, where was he in the sprint? He was 19th, and he was 37 seconds off after, and then had to retire yesterday after, like, it was lap 11, where he was 51 seconds behind Marc Marquez. I mean, that is just, how bad is that for Aprilia?
It is, isn't it? Yeah, I'm smiling because, my prediction of a late sprint victory didn't quite come to fruition, did it? But, I mean, let's rewind. Friday looked great, didn't it?
It did, yeah.
Friday afternoon, they were up there with Mark. They matched Mark. But then as soon as that grip disappeared with the rain, Mark I think it was about 2 seconds difference that he lost, as far as that Friday pace to the race pace.
Yep.
So the Aprilias lost 4 or 5 seconds. As you say, just, talking about not being able to lean, feeling like they're going to crash on every corner. And it was really all of them. Miguel Oliveira had a decent sprint, but was still time-wise a long way back, wasn't he? And I think it was a bit of his riding style. He's very sort of gentle on the bike, and they thought maybe that helped him there. But yeah, really, it highlighted. Well, they say you learn more on your bad weekends, don't they? But and it really highlighted that in those, we've seen it a bit before in damp conditions, haven't we, with the Aprilia, where it goes between sort of wet and dry. They just have no grip. It gets that stage where the track's a bit damp and they just have no grip, and that seemed to be what happened with the dirt on the track. A horrible weekend, I think, was even how the team called it, a nightmare. Words like this were coming out. On the other hand, it is only one event, and it was a very unusual event to have lap times this slow compared to previous years and everything else. So we've got to wait and see. Will they be back at Misano? I mean, there should be a lot more grip. It's their local track, of course. I have loads of data there, so we've got to wait and see. But I don't think anyone could have imagined the weekend, especially after starting so well, would go downhill as much as it did for them.
Yeah, and Alicia Spargaro shared it was a good video on his Instagram of the start that he had in the sprint. I mean, the wheel spin and the dirt getting kicked up, and then he just absolutely missed his breaking point. And it just Christ, was it Gian Antonio or Bezzecchi? He had, it was one of the VR46 bikes. I mean, and then after that, he went on an absolute, I imagine with the media, just saying how bad the track conditions were, which was fair enough, but it was just a disaster, really, Saturday, Sunday, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, they were quick on over one lap on Friday, but looking at the kind of the long run pace, they were running, kind of did their work on a soft tire, and they were sort of a second off the pace of Mark on a 17 lap old medium tire. So there were kind of signs it was going to be a tricky kind of race anyway. The fact that it went as bad as it did is genuinely worrying for Aprilia, especially because you think back a couple of years ago to like a track like Barcelona and Argentina as well, where the grip was really low and Alicia Spargaro excelled and the Aprilia was really good. So it's kind of this reverse sort of thing now with the RSGP, where it's they seem to need a lot of grip to get the best out of it, which is kind of a worrying sign that they've improved the bike in some areas, but they've gone in another direction and made it worse in others, and they clearly haven't found that middle ground yet. Just picking up Alicia's point about the circuit, a lot of riders made the point as well. We saw Pecco's really bad start.
Yeah,
it was dangerous. Like, we have dirty tracks before. We know there is a cleaner side of the grid that's just normal, but this was a track that was finished resurfacing kind of mid-June, so not that long ago. And sorry, excuse me. And so that's how angry I am about the track. That standard isn't good enough for a world championship like MotoGP. We've seen this before. There's clearly a problem with the track homologation process, or there is something just not working, because we went to India last year and it wasn't until the Wednesday or the Thursday that the track was homologated. And I think everyone forgets that had it rained that weekend, we would not have been racing.
That's
it
right.
It was not going to be happening at all. The barriers were too close. The track surface wasn't great. When we went to Indonesia the first time, the circuit was a problem in the test, and then they did a bit of resurfacing, and the track was coming up in the race. It was even worse. And Michelin also didn't have any testing data to go with, so their tyres were wrong, and that obviously led to that massive crash we saw from Marc, which led to double vision problems. I remember at the time Honda being furious with it. They were so angry with Michelin that they Alberto Puig sent my old workplace, Autosport, like a statement about it for us to run. He was so angry about it. And there's been a few other times as well, like that we go to a new track or we go to a new surface and it's, it looks fine, but then we get there and it's, the riders are saying it's not good enough, it's too dirty, it's too safe, or we've cleaned the track. But this can't keep happening. There needs to be a better process in place. We cannot come to a resurfaced track and Michelin have no data, and the riders find that the circuit's really not that suitable to be racing on until Friday afternoon, well, Saturday really, because Friday afternoon the pace was good, the grip kind of came in, and you can argue, well, because of the rain, okay, fine, but okay, we have a recent example of that, Silverstone 2018. The track was fine in the dry, but it was bumpy, but it was raceable in the dry, and then the rain happened, and then it was unusable. That track probably would have been unusable in Aragon had it been a full wet race. I think the grip there was bad, and there was a lot of patches that had been patchwork there because it come up. So yeah, I think the riders do need to kind of maybe band together a bit more in that type of thing, because you cannot come to a racetrack and that be the situation. How they solve it with the Michelin thing, I think Michelin maybe needs to do more testing with the test team riders, bring them to circuits that have been resurfaced, get them to run, to have a bit of data there. You can't come to a circuit blind. We've done that at Phillip Island a few times and we've had problems. Yeah, I think it was unacceptable, and there does need to be a bit more done on that front, because this isn't the first time that we come to a track that's been resurfaced or new and it's not been suitable. Like that, we were lucky we got away with that in all the races, but like we were very close to some really nasty incidents in both starts, and there was nothing that any of those riders could have done about that.
Yeah, and there was, even across all classes, Pete, in Moto 2 and Moto 3, I mean, I think it was the qualifying, especially for Moto 3, it was just, they're having so many high sides, all of them, and they were just going offline a little bit, and Moto 2 seen some massive crashes as well. Just not really the standard it should be, should it? And it can't be relying on ideal weather conditions the whole time, because that's just how it doesn't work. Because Aragon does have a tendency in the past to have storms, and it does rain overnight, and it has, it gets just that dirty sort of layer on the tarmac that it had. It was just a bit of a bit amateurish, I think, wasn't it, for MotoGP, especially for this weekend?
Yeah, there's not much you can do about the weather, is there? But what you can do is, as you say, the data. And let's remember, the soft tyre was basically removed for the Sunday break. So that probably also one of the reasons why Aprilia suffered, in some of those teams. Maybe they would have liked to race with the soft, but they found that it was blistering, the temperature was too high with it, so they had to go to the medium. And the hard, we mentioned before, there was 3 options. They did bring another option, but all of them were fairly hard. And the hard option that they brought was it just wasn't really possible to use anyway. So they all went with the medium, and yet again, that just obviously a harder combo reduces the grip even more. So yeah, I think, as Lewis says, I think you need to test, don't you, before a MotoGP event these days. There's not really an excuse for that. It's difficult with the grid, with the dirt on the grid. You get some riders, I think Fabio Quartararo said, the trouble is if you clean the track, you wash the rubber away as well. So, but to have that level of dirt on the grid, there must be some way of coming up with a system, isn't it? Or a procedure. Okay, if so many riders or teams say, look, we think the grid needs to be cleaned, this is what you do, this is how you clean it, and everyone agrees to it, because we know from past experience you can't let the teams touch the grid, because then you get into difficulties. So there needs to be some official way, doesn't it, where people can sort of say, look, this is a safety issue. This is Bagnaia starts repeatedly as well, wasn't it? We saw in warm up, of course, it was wet, that didn't help.
Yeah.
But even by Sunday, he still couldn't get off the line with all the data, with all that they had off the bike. He's still weaving back and forth. And Lewis mentions Phillip Island. Of course, that's been resurfaced for this year, and we'll be in the same situation again. We'll go to that race without a test beforehand. Yeah. So again, it's a difficult one to put Michelin in as well. I think from their point of view, they would want a test, but it's getting the teams to agree to it in this sort of packed schedule. But maybe there does need to be, it needs to be not an option, almost like, well, look, at least you need to all send your factory test riders. Okay, not the race riders, but every factory sends a test rider. We have seen that before in the past, haven't we, at some circuits. Maybe that just needs to be a mandatory system when you resurface a track.
Yeah, it's a real complex situation to try and tackle, and it comes down to also, I think, the resources too, isn't it? They would want to love and test and get sorted, but the calendar's so packed as well, isn't it, Lewis? That's the trying to find that point of trying to do it. That's difficult.
Yes, I think part of the problem as well is just the way Michelin operates. Like I remember at Misano last year, there was a kind of a breakfast with Piero Taramasso, the Michelin Motorsport boss, and he was asked about 2025 tires and what testing they do and what they've done, and he's like, well, we've done some testing with I think it's Sylvain Gintoli does stuff for Michelin, and just as an aside, just thoughts to his family right now. Sure, I echo everyone's sentiments here. But he was saying they do laps with Sylvain on a superbike. I was like, okay, but how could you test MotoGP tires on a superbike? That to me just seems like and I know it's difficult to get a hold of a MotoGP bike and keep the spares up and such, but there surely must be an agreement they can reach with a manufacturer to have a couple of year old bike where they can have some spares and they can do, we've seen in Formula One, for example, Pirelli have been able to use, test cars that are fairly recent to kind of do their own private testing. And we see there in F1 as well when it comes to new tyres, they'll sometimes bring prototype experimental tyres for the following season for an FP1 session. The drivers are mandated, you have to do X amount of laps, blah, blah, blah. We see that in MotoGP tests, but how many tests do we get to? Well, first of all, how many tests do we have in a year? Not very many. And how many do we get to where they're like, oh, I never actually used a tyre because blah, blah, blah. I think, a lot of riders have problems with Michelin. They don't openly criticise, but as we saw with Pecco and the tyre problems, a lot of these would be eliminated if the processes that Michelin put in place for its testing, for its all this type of thing, for its data gathering, if the processes were better. So the calendar's packed, but I think Michelin could be doing a better job.
Yeah,
I could just to add that. So the test bike for Michelin, from what I'm aware, it's got carbon brakes, and I think they upgrade the suspension. I think the reason they don't use an old MotoGP bike is all of the other manufacturers, or no one would agree, oh no, you're testing with a pick a manufacturer, your tires are going to suit that bike, so you then end up trying to get that's where the difficulty lies.
I know how to solve this. Get the Suzuki's
there you are.
Well, I think on that situation though, is if you have an old enough bike, it's not going to make much of a difference. And also they just have to say to the manufacturers, look, you either want good tires and data and stuff, or do you want the same situation? So I think MotoGP has been quite good at strong-arming the manufacturers before in terms of get this way, so it can do it again. And I think for the common good, they just need to be like, okay, well, if it's a Ducati or a Honda or blah, 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 whatever, it probably should be a Ducati because it's clearly the best bike in terms of working tyres. There's no point testing new tyres in a Honda, for example, because they'll just spin, there'll be no grip. So, but I think there just does need to be more done on this way, because it isn't working right now, and we can't keep having Aragon situations.
Yeah,
I think what you said about the FP1 idea, I think that'd be great. Put another 15 minutes on a Grand Prix weekend and say, this is just to test new tyres. It's on an actual racetrack, actual race riders. Everyone's got the same. There's no paranoia about, they've got more laps than we have. That to me sounds a good idea.
And they've done it before. Remember when I think a couple of times at the Saxon Ring. Once was when they tried that new sort of slightly wider sort of curb at turn 11, where they And then a couple of years later, when it was resurfaced, they were like, okay, you've got 20 minutes extra.
That's right.
They can do that. The schedule is flexible enough, and even more so now that MotoGP's last on, after every session. Like it just seems bizarre to me the way they operate sometimes. Like, there's very easy, common sense ideas there, and they're just like, oh, well, we don't have a solution. It's like, well, you do. You just need to use your brain a bit more.
Yeah. Who knows what the plan is going forward, and good point, Pete, about Phillip Island. I actually forgot about it being resurfaced, and yeah, it's only really a month away now, and it's like, well, let's see how that happens. Who knows what's going to happen, because we have seen in the past it being so abrasive, and it's created a lot of problems for a lot of riders. So yeah, Phillip Island next month, that'll be one to put in your diary and just keep it in the back of your mind as we head into practice and qualifying for the Australian Grand Prix. But focusing on this week, sorry, I keep thinking Misano's next week, but it's this weekend, and just a quick preview, gents. I mean, if you're going to go off form, Ducatis are going to be strong, the Aprilia should be stronger, KTM should be stronger, but are we going to expect Pete, Bagnaia, Martin, Bastianini, Marquez, throw in a couple of others? It'll just be that order, or could we see an interesting race as Bagnaia tries to get back on top?
Yeah, it might be a bit much to call it the first race of 2025, but as you guys were saying, it's Ducati's home round. You've got Ducati riders that all want to just put themselves in position for next year, don't they? If you're Marc Marquez, of course, interesting relationship with the Italian fans, shall we say, in the past. It's an opportunity for him. He's going there on a high. He's certainly going to be motivated to do well, isn't he? But yeah, I think Ducati for me start as the overwhelming favourites for the reason the past record, the fact it's their local track as well, testing data. Yeah, tough to see them being beaten from my side this weekend.
Marc Marquez's last visit to Misano was like literally 3-4 weeks ago, and he certainly made an impact there, Lewis, with Nicolo Bulliga at the Ducati race day they had of champions. But it should be Bagnaia trying to get back on top, because he tests here with the VR46 Academy. It's his home race. He really loves it, doesn't he, around this place?
Well, he has to. Like, there's not an option now but to be winning here. He needs to get back on terms with Martin going forward, because if another mistake, or if he lets Martin take any more points for him, he's going to find this championship slipping away from him quickly. I think what is going to be interesting, and not to sort of kind of stir up anything, but obviously I imagine that Valentino is probably going to be in attendance this weekend, and obviously for the past few weeks he's been very vocal about Ducati and Marc and that situation. So yeah, I think what happens on track will have a very kind of interesting sort of dynamic with what's sort of going on behind the scenes with Valentino and Pecco's ear, and yeah, I think there's a potential for it to be quite a spicy weekend.
Yeah, it is, and Misano's I think it's quite underrated, to be honest. I think it always kind of delivers. People say it's difficult to overtake, but I always think the races are they're really close most of the time. You always get a quite close battle at the front, and it's kind of good that Bagnaia is going to come in here trying to prove a point. And Martin, knowing last year, yes, Bagnaia was injured, and he did do the double. And you add in the factor of Marquez, you add in the factor that Bastianini has gone well here in the past. He obviously missed last year too because of injury. It's setting up to be a very nice weekend, isn't it?
On the racing side, let's hope so, because let's be honest, this is two race weekends in a row that haven't been that great, have they, in terms of racing at the front. So yeah, that'd be definitely welcome if we can get some close racing this weekend. Yeah, as you guys have said, the Italian riders will be fully motivated, won't they? You can tell them what you like about riding sensibly and everything else, but at the end of the day, they're racing there in front of all their friends, fans. There's always a great atmosphere there. It's flat. The track's flat, isn't it? But it's quite sort of compressed. It's got different corners, everything else, and there's so much in it for all of them as far as local pride and everything else, isn't there? And to say all that, and then Jorge Martin, as you say, he's the guy who maybe hasn't got all that pressure, all that or again, maybe he's the guy who just comes out of it all with more points than anyone else. I wouldn't be surprised, because I think he's going into this race in the best possible situation at the moment.
Yeah, and sorry, Lewis, just to stay on the topic of Pramac, is it fair to say I think they'll announce who is riding for them next year? Would that be? And I wouldn't be surprised. We all know it's going to be Jack Miller and Miguel Oliveira. So that'll be completing the grid then, Lewis, for the 2025 lineup, won't it? So yeah,
it makes sense for Pramac to do it there, and yeah, we'll have the full grid wrapped up by early September, which is quite nice actually. It is. It took until October. Wow, it took until the day after Valencia for the 2024 grid to be completed. So yeah, it's good. Just picking up on Pete's point there about Jorge Martin as well, as he spent quite a lot of Sunday's press conference saying about Misano. I think the Italian riders will be quick there. I think the Italian riders will be quick. He's already kind of. I think on two parts. One, he's going, okay, there's no pressure on me because I don't ride there all the time. And also, in case he does get beaten, then he can go, well, I don't test there every 5 minutes with my pals. So there's kind of, Martin's clever. He knows what he's doing. But yeah, I like Misano too. I think it does generally have good races. It's a great atmosphere. Personally, if I was to recommend anyone to go to a race as a fan or as media, whatever, go to Misano. It's great. It's cheap. There's tons of places to stay all along the coast. The weather's always generally great. Me and my partner had a couple extra days in Misano last year. We went to Tavullia. We went to the Simoncelli Museum. Spent some time on the beach. It's great. I love Misano. More races should be like Misano in terms of just that whole kind of. You could really make a nice week out of it. So yeah, I'm very disappointed. I'm going to be sat at home and not there this year.
Yeah, and as I look outside, it's currently raining. I'm like, well, that's really going to cheer me up when I look at Misano and it's 30 degrees. I'm like, well, this will be fun. And also the ad, it's got two of my favourite corners. I love the long left that it has, the Quercia corner. I love Carbone. It's a proper corner, so it is. And I think, to see MotoGP bikes going through there is, it's pretty spectacular. And I suppose it really just leaves our predictions. I know we can't really go off much. I always not dislike the fact that we're doing a podcast that's straight into the next race, but you've nothing to really go off other than yesterday. And Pete, who do you think I'll give you a race winner just for both of them, the sprint and the Grand Prix. Who do you think's going to take honours this weekend?
I'll go Martin in the sprint, and I think I'll Bagnaia for Sunday. There we are. So, but let's see.
Lewis, who's your picks?
I'm going to go Mark on both. Why not? Let's see if we can carry on that momentum.
I think I'm going to say Bagnaia for the sprint and Jorge Martin for the Grand Prix. I think, or if he just finishes second again, it'll be on an incredible run. But I think Martin, as you say, he's kind of putting the pressure on the Italians, but I think he's got something up his sleeve. I think he's showed how quick he's been around here, and I think, this would be an absolute perfect time to get a win on Italian soil. Imagine that, and extend the championship lead. That would be pretty special, wouldn't it?
Well, and just reminding Ducati about who they let go, and saying hello to Aprilia for next year. So he has also actually got plenty of reasons, like Marquez. They might not be home riders, but plenty of reasons to want to perform this weekend.
Yeah, and let's go ahead.
I would just like to point out as a mini preview as well. So it's a test on the Monday. I think Pete mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. It'll be very, very interesting to see what spec of bike Mark finds himself having a few laps on Monday if Ducati decide to give him a look at the initial 2025 prototype. I'll be very, very curious to see how that goes.
How would that work? This is just a curiosity thing I have for both of you. So say Marquez was to get shown or get given the 25 for a couple of laps. What do they say to Frankie Carcetti? You can't see anything? Is it literally, does Marquez then go down to the factory and have to be like, this is what it feels like, essentially? How would that even work if it was to be a possibility?
I think they just give it to him to run in his pit box, to be honest. And because they're still a Ducati team, aren't they?
Yeah, true.
So the Ducati, they'd have more Ducati engineers in there, obviously, from the factory, would come down to hear his feedback and maybe check the bikes all set up right and everything else. But there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't. At a test you can run everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be within the rules. There's no one checking what you run at a test. It's only if you then take it to a Grand Prix weekend that it has to fit all the regulations. So you're free to experiment, and whether that means 25 bikes or even an older bike, you can run whatever you want.
Yeah, Lewis, would you be surprised if Ducati said to Marquez, there's the updated red height device for your 23? I think that would be something I'm kind of trying to see that he might possibly test. I think that would be it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point as well. I think it'll be the first chance for kind of Ducati to put a few updates. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, that if they update that GP23, they are contractually bound to give updates to the other ones.
Yeah.
There are some sort of suggestions and reports that the GP23s aren't actually Valencia spec bikes, are a bit older than that. So yeah, that will be kind of curious to see how that kind of plays out. But yeah, you would expect that there would be some updates for those GP23s, and certainly from Ducati's point of view, from Marc to try and kind of, I think they would hope that he could be deployed as sort of a tail gunner for Pecco for the next few rounds. But yeah, we'll see. But I mean, it's interesting. We're talking about this sort of test and Marquez in this test. When you think 12 months ago at the same point, we were talking about this as being like, well, this is make or break for Honda. If they don't deliver him a bike, he's going to leave. That was the weekend where all the rumours started to come that he was going to be going to Gresini and stuff like that. Or, yeah, remember that test? And he came up to the media at like 1 o'clock.
That's right.
Really early, and everyone was like, is the bike any better? And he was like, no. So from that point, we were like, yeah, that doesn't seem like a very good sign for Honda. So it's an interesting kind of, this is where we're at now. How time flies.
Yeah, and like I say, we'll have everything covered from the Grand Prix at the weekend, and also we'll cover a bit from the testing as well, just because it's always seen, isn't it, Pete, as the important test for the first evolutions of 25. So yeah, it'll be something worth listening to, watching on YouTube, wherever you're getting our content from. So yeah, plenty to talk about, and the next month is packed with MotoGP, so we're getting into that real crunch time of the championship. I love it. I know plenty of fans love it as well. So yeah, if you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to like, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a comment of what you thought of the weekend. Leave predictions for Misano. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, make sure to hit the follow button. You'll never miss an episode. And yeah, we'll see you next week for another episode of the Crash MotoGP podcast. Take care.